How do you know when a brand strategy is good?
The question of how do you know if you have a good brand strategy is very much like asking, do you have a good idea for a song?
What do you mean when you say vanity content? Like, what kind of content is that?
Just, taking photos of myself being cool and sexy, which as you get older, you can't do. Nobody wants any of that. You have to put frameworks up. If you're having to convince a company about why to do the thing they've hired you to do, you're not set up to succeed.
Strategists lean too much on these frameworks? Like, is that what you're saying? Like, that it kind of leads nowhere, but it looks like it
No,
does?
no, no, no. A little.
Today on Deep Feed, I chat with Mark Pollard, a leading brand strategist who helps leaders, marketers, and agencies get out of their heads and into the wild using a combination of training, strategy, and writing. He is the author of a $37,000 Kickstarter funded book called Strategy is Your Words, a 400-page breakdown of how to better approach brand strategy, with over 8,000 books sold. Mark is also the host and CEO of Sweathead, a place for people to come together and practice strategy through memberships, masterclasses, events, and conferences. At Sweathead, Mark has trained the likes of Twitter Next, Complex Media, Wall Street Journal, Uber Eats, Meta, Pinterest, as well as agencies around the world. Let's get into it. Hi, Mark. Welcome to Deep Feed.
Hey, Winter, pleasure to be here.
So, can we start with you telling us about yourself and exactly what you do at Sweathead?
As an Australian, telling people about myself is one of my favorite pastimes.
So, you're not going to tell us
No, I
anything?
love it. But I tell you what, if you ever work with an Australian in a major city like New York, get them to have to do self-introductions in every single meeting, and it will paralyze them. Uh,
Why is that?
because we have, like, this thing called the tall poppy syndrome. Top
Mm.
tall poppy, tall plant, cut it off at its knees, so if you think and act like you're better than other people, people will take the piss. They'll take the mickey out of you.
Oh, okay, that's good
Yeah,
to know.
we try to keep it humble. But today I won't.
Yeah, please don't. Please give us everything.
No, just briefly, I think just like professionally, I started Australia's first full color hip hop magazine, and so most of my 20s was around underground hip hop, graffiti, DJing, MCing, MC battles, events, and all that kind of stuff. But I also worked in advertising. So first decade was working mostly with websites, so information architecture, user experience, and content. And then late-ish 20s, took on a role that was called account planner at Leo Burnett and have been doing sort of brand strategy, advertising strategy, plus digital stuff ever since. And then I'm 7 years into running my own little company. It's called Sweathead Podcast. Have a book, Strategies Your Words, and do teaching and training around the world.
Yeah, so for folks listening who may not know or want to learn more, I'd like to kind of you're a brand strategist and you're really well known in that field, but like can you define in your words what brand strategy means?
Yeah, and to define brand strategy is a little bit different from defining a brand strategist. There are sort of pockets of industry which fight over these terms, who owns them and who gets to do these things. Brand strategy is just working out how to put a brand into the world based on some understanding of people and brands that you're competing with, and also best practices or research into what helps a brand actually appear in the world and to get into people's memories, which is the point of having a brand, to get into people's memories.
Yeah, definitely. But what would you say the difference between brand strategy and marketing strategy is? Because I think people confuse those a lot and they use them interchangeably, but they're very different. So, how do you describe the difference there?
Yeah, people also argue about which one nests under which one, right? So let's start with marketing. Marketing strategy typically deals with the four P's: product, place, where the product's sold, price, how it's priced, promotion. Sometimes there are five P's or six P's, but typically it's four P's. For me personally, brand sits within marketing, and it could also sit everywhere. But I think as a function in a company, if you have a brand led or brand centric marketing team, I would want branding and the brand thinkers in the marketing team. Where it gets a little bit tricky is in many ways, if you have a company that has a strong brand, the brand's everywhere, and it sits in the middle of everything. Right. I,
Right.
I think that's what confuses people. And then people argue about which is more important, which doesn't really matter. It depends on the people you have in the company. But yeah, it's a little bit complicated.
Yeah, super complicated. I think at Posture, we definitely kind of lead with like the brand as business kind of methodology, with the brand being the center of a company that informs marketing and informs sales and everything. But yeah, I think it totally depends on the approach there.
Well, maybe it also depends on the CEO as well, because I would like to think that companies would see the brand being at the heart of every single thing that they did, from product development through to customer experience, through to how signatures are written in emails, etc. But for it to be at the heart of a business means that a CEO or the C-suite need to understand what it is, need to value it, and then need to get their people to put their brand everywhere, right? And that's not very common because so many CEOs and C-suite people are very numerically oriented, and many of them sort of look down on brand and marketing as like the less important stuff in a business.
How do you kind of deal with that? Like when you're trying to tell someone why it's important, like what is your approach to explaining to like a CEO who's like, who cares, you know?
Well, they're probably not talking to people like us. And I think one thing, if you're running an agency, is to not attract people like them.
Right.
And then you don't have to have that conversation. If you're having to convince a company about why to do the thing they've hired you to do, you're not set up to succeed. Having said that, there's a ton of research out there about how brands grow. There's a book called How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp. A lot of this research has come out of Australia and England, or at least it's promoted in England. It's less mainstream in the US for some reason. But there's a lot of research that talks about things like creativity, for example, is the second biggest driver of advertising profitability after just being a really big brand. That's from Kantar.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much stuff that's out there. So trying to get the numbers in front of the numbers people is probably step one.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, when it comes to the strategy, actually, and speaking of your book, Strategy is Your Words, there is a phrase in there that really struck my attention that I wanted to kind of chat with you about. And that it's on page 217, chapter 4, for anyone watching and wants to buy the book, which you should. It's called the 4 Points Framework. And you said, and I quote, strategists are addicted to frameworks, and frameworking is postmodernism in the name of capitalism. And both frameworks and capitalism thrive on addiction. So I know we're kind of veering here into the more of the nitty gritty, but can you expand on what you mean by this? Like why strategists might be addicted to frameworks?
Yeah, it's super weird hearing your own words back because I wrote that probably 5 years ago, and there's a particular set of voices and absurdism in this book. So when people bring some of that back to me, it's quite funny. It's not out of body, but it is a little bit surreal. So yeah, look, capitalism feeds on addiction, straightforward, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Strategists love a framework because so much of the strategist's job is bouncing around, and many do have bouncy brains. And then a framework on one piece of paper or on one slide gives them a way to structure their thinking and might help people around them believe that clarity is happening when most of the job is confusion. So that's really what's going on there. The postmodernism bit is really trying to help strategists understand that the way that their brains break things apart that are around them and then assemble them in ways that generate new meaning, that's literally the job. Um,
Yeah.
Postmodernism just makes it sound smarter.
Yeah. So do you think strategists lean too much on these frameworks? Like, is that what you're saying? Like that it kind of leads nowhere, but it looks like it
No,
does?
no, 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 no. Uh, a little, a little. There's some research that came out recently that something around 50% of the people who responded to the research said that frameworks get in the way of strategy. And for me, it's not the framework's problem. That's the culture and maybe the talent of the people using the frameworks. But there is a school of thought out there and a set of experiences that makes sense, where frameworks are kind of filled in mindlessly, like with the same energy that you'd use to fill in an online driver's application. Just like open up your template, fill it in, put a lot of big words in, dunk. The framework is not responsible for a lack of critical thinking. That's on the individual and the team that they're working with. So having said that, some strategists want to constantly invent frameworks because it's fun for them, but maybe it can end up being a little bit of a distraction. And
Yeah.
can not only just distract them, but it can distract people around them and lower their credibility.
Yeah. I think this is something, that we've worked out over the years at Posture too, because we have our own frameworks. And when we like submit our work to our clients, we have different kinds of documentation and stuff. And I think what often is missing is like showing something in action, like along with a framework. So it's not just like words written on paper, it's not just a chart or a graph, but like actually having that be side by side with like real life examples or like, just showing how that actually works, I think is often the missing piece. Cause I think sometimes, and I'm not Posture's brand strategist. I work with brand strategists. We hire them, but I think it's really easy to get lost in like something lofty, like a little too high
Yeah,
level
yeah.
where it doesn't actually apply. Like it's just it's hard to train like a bigger team on it and like they don't understand how to apply the principles like in a broader sense, like to social media, for example. So yeah, I think what do you kind of recommend for making a strategy really strong? Like how do you know when you've landed on a good framework, for example?
Well, I would put the framework in a mini operating system, right? So whether you are a marketer, whether you have an in-house creative team, whether you're an agency, I think you need a mini operating system, and it starts with the philosophy. Like, what are you there to do? How do you know what good ideas are? How do you talk about good ideas in your company? So you have to articulate that. And then you need a set of frameworks and templates that bring that to life. So, for example, if you wanted your philosophy to be about creating famous brands as opposed to focusing on like conversion, then fame is going to need to affect your templates and your frameworks. And you only need, let's say, like maybe you need a creative brief template, you probably need a strategy template, maybe something for a comms plan, maybe one or two other things. But you want the idea of fame to somehow run through them so that there's like a coherence from the philosophy into the frameworks and the templates. And then you need to give people questions to ask of the work as it's happening. So one of my favorite ideas on this is Anselmo Ramos, who is the co-founder of Gut, an agency that's doing really well right now. And he talks about he doesn't believe that his team has an idea until they need to call a lawyer,
Mhm.
right? So if he's looking at work, he can say, "Hey, do we need to call a lawyer?" Now that one question is getting at least two things. If you need to call a lawyer, it means the idea hasn't been done before. Check. But it also means that it's risky and provocative, and that's what he wants from his ideas, right? So, philosophy, frameworks, and templates, a few questions to ask of the work as it's happening. You need executive advocacy and education. There's five things that I think help all of this come together. Because when someone's like, how do you write a good creative brief or how do you have a good strategy framework? It's like, to do what?
Right.
It has to start there because anything can be a framework.
How do you know when a brand strategy is good?
So, for me, it starts with the mechanics. If I'm using the 4 points or get to buy or the four C's, can I see a clear, what I would call like strategic idea? That's jargon. It gets confusing. Who gets to have ideas? Is it the creative team? Is it the strategist? I want a strategist to have ideas, but I want them to be the ideas of good nonfiction writing. So I look for topics coming together. I look for a provocative problem statement based on research. Can we argue for it? It's not that it has to be true or false. It's can we argue for it? Because to me, good strategy, there's often a creative leap. I don't need
Right.
a survey to prove the problem because we're going to convince them that it's a problem based on the research that we've done. So we're making an argument. So I'm looking for the mechanics of these things. Then there's the subjectivity. Okay. So with an insight, for example, I want people to feel a bit uncomfortable. I want them to snort or giggle or look sideways like, is this true? Can we actually go out there and say that? And just because it's on a strategy framework doesn't mean you're going to say it in public. So we have to separate those two things so that you're not kind of gatekeeping yourself from your own success. Okay, don't
Right.
do that. So mechanics, subjectivity, and then potentially you test some content out, or you have tested some content out with some of these themes. The challenge with the question is the question of how do you know if you have a good brand strategy is very much like asking, do you have a good idea for a song?
Like you never know.
You don't know. You got to write the song and then you got to put it out into public. Obviously, with our line of work, you can test little things like content, or you could run surveys, get people's feedback, etc. Uh, but also, until ideas appear in the wild, or an idea appears from a creative team, if you're working with one, You don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, so then I mean, I think companies hire agencies or freelancers to like build a strategy and then that's done. And then it's like, okay, here it is. And then the brand thinks that that's it forever, basically. But I think you're right. I think it's about like this is just the first to test and like over like making content about it or surveying your audience first before you decide like this is the definitive perfect brand strategy for us or like the perfect statement. So yeah, I think I agree with what you said, like that testing and iteration is really important. And people want it to just be like, this is it, we're moving on. Like we figured it out. But I think you never like it needs to evolve over
Maybe
time
a
too.
little bit. Having said that, there's a campaign that's it's more mainstream than the brands that you work with. I know, so hopefully this is not too mainstream and uncool. I want to be cool. But there's this new campaign for Lay's, the chips, and the line is O Lay's, OHLAYS, and Messi, Lionel Messi is in it, and it happens around football, and people are chanting "Ole, ole, ole," something like that, right? That's a perfect idea. The ad's not very good though
Ooh,
because it's
okay.
not creative. There's no storytelling. Like Messi appears and then there's a game and it finishes, and it's like, what the hell is that? It's as if someone designed a PowerPoint presentation for an ad, but they ran the PowerPoint presentation. But the idea is really good for so many reasons, right? It's a mnemonic device. So if they just repeat ole 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 for the next 10 years, it's going to be on everybody's minds. It's connected to the world's biggest game, which means that anytime people are watching the game, there's a chance that they'll see it. And it's also connected to this phrase that people use in the game, when someone's getting dribbled or nutmegged, it's ole, ole, ole. So it's so good, but the ad sucks. So in that particular example, and no offense, but it's not good. But in that example, I would encourage the CMO to keep the idea of that alive, but come up with way more creative ways to bring it to life. Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think that you said that's the perfect idea? Like, how do you know that's the perfect idea?
So when I'm saying something complimentary like that, it doesn't come out of nowhere because I'm not prone to like hyperbolic compliments. But if you spend a little bit of time around the research that's come out in the past decade or so about brands, what that campaign could do, or what that idea, the Olays what that idea with Olays could do, could bring to life all of the stuff that we've learned from decades of research. Right? So, one, advertising's goal is to get into people's memories, knowing that most people don't buy a product very often. So you have to go very broad and reach people a lot of the time so that maybe they think about you when they're going to buy something in your category. Two, distinctive brand assets are the things you need to get into people's heads: jingles, characters, logos, colors, fonts, old school stuff, right?
Right.
Uh, and then three, emotion is really, really important. And there are little storytelling techniques that System One in the UK has done some research on. Wordplay, really good for creating memories. Olay is kind of wordplay on on the actual name, but they could probably use it even more. Unfolding drama. What's going to happen in this scene? And the ad lacks that, right?
Mhm.
So it's missing a few of these things, but it's set up really, really well to be extremely effective.
That makes sense. Um, yeah, so I think jumping off of that, I think people often, mainly startups, I mean, obviously not like large corporations that have been around forever, but startups especially want to have a really strong brand strategy in place before jumping on social. They kind of want to make sure that there's this like there's a perfectionism in it almost. Like they want to know what they're doing, and that makes sense, and that's what we do is we work with startups to build the strategy and the foundation before we start posting or like figuring out how they're showing up in the world. But they often will on the flip side, they will just some brands will just start jumping in, which has its benefits because you're learning quick, but they get frustrated because there's lack of results or they don't know how to measure what they're putting out in the world. So I'm curious if you can explain the difference or the relationship between brand strategy and social media strategy. and how one informs the other.
Yeah, it's so complicated as well because a lot of the people involved with social media don't really get brand strategy. And like the entrance for being in social media is that you're young and use the platforms. And then you're sort of talking about strategy, but you're actually often talking about best practices. Like our strategy is to make shareable stuff. That's not a strategy. That's like, when wouldn't you do that? It's not specific enough. So that's one thing. And then I think the other thing that breaks between the two is often not an understanding of conceptual thinking, like what an idea is. So, for example, the New York Knicks example, if we wanted to have fun with the New York Knicks and anger management, I would expect a lot of the social media content to come from that idea. I want to keep that idea alive. Another challenge is that the people in social media are constantly looking at all the trends and trying to work out like which trend could we jump on, etc. So it's a very complicated job. Um, what doesn't help is when the brand strategy is really intellectual as well.
Hmm.
So that just confuses everyone. Everyone's frustrated with each other. The social media people don't think they can use it. The brand strategists don't think they're understood, and they can get a little bit precious as well. I think one of the big i- shifts that needs to happen right now is a lot of brands, and especially startup brands, I think they're acting like influencers from about 2 years ago, as opposed to creators from right now.
Hmm.
So there's been a bit written about this, a couple of things that are happening, the TikTokification of all platforms, whether it's LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, etc., YouTube. Your subscriber and follower count matters, but you still have to get your content through the algorithm to reach people who subscribe to you
Hmm.
or who followed you. And it's frustrating a lot of creators. A lot of them are giving up, right?
Definitely.
Um, and then two, brands sort of see, if you think about like a stereotypical, like attractive 25-year-olds influencer page, that's what a lot of, I think, startup brands are doing, right?
Hmm.
They're not creating valuable content. They're creating like vanity content. Valuable content could be 5 seconds. Here's a graph, here's a face, boom. And that could do really, really, really well, right?
Hmm.
But a lot of them are sort of stuck in this influencer mindset, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. What do you mean when you say vanity content? Like, what kind of content is that?
Just, taking photos of myself being cool and sexy, which as you get older, you can't do. Nobody wants any of that. You have to put frameworks up, right? Or, drop some sick videos about hair transplants in Turkey. But
I love those videos, by the way.
it's my best
I'm a
content.
fan.
I,
Yeah.
I need to launch a business because it's my best content. We can talk about. Happy to talk about it, but yeah, it's sort of it's shallow, vain copycat content
Hmm.
as opposed to more unhinged, like Duolingo,
Oh, yeah,
valuable content, commentary, opinion, hot takes. Yeah,
definitely. So, and if we were to give some advice, like, what are the first steps a brand should take to kind of make sure that the brand strategy and like long-term business goals are being reflected in the social content? So kind of, because you're right, it's like so hard to balance making sure that you're on trends or you're relevant while also knowing your North Star as a company.
yeah.
And like, what do you recommend to translate that?
Well, first of all, to keep your words simple. So I'll share an example. Helping out an Indian e-commerce store called Sucker Store. They sell succulents, and we had a workshop the other day talking about this. We don't know the exact language that we're going to use for the brand, but one of the main issues, and it's an issue that they believe they're solving compared to the competitors, is have you ever bought a succulent and then it's died?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they're
Yep.
trying to solve that problem with the terracotta pots and soil mix, etc. Okay. So, from a brand strategy point of view, the first thing that came to mind was the Bee Gees song "Staying Alive." I don't know if we're going to use that exact language, but we're going to somehow talk about staying alive, right? And there are a few different ways that we can do this. One is not just about the succulent staying alive, but when you bring nature into the home, it helps you feel alive, right? So we kind of know from a brand point of view, we want to be there. So we start there. Then we go through their top performing content. What's been working? What kind of collaborations have been working? And we take a few cues from there. Their audience. probably a little bit younger, say 20s, maybe in apartments for the first time, probably also living at home. There's probably something about a succulent being like a pet or even like a trial baby. And there's a way to talk about like you can have these plants at home and basically pretend like you're becoming an adult,
Hmm.
because they'll stay alive. But we can take some of the pain points, we can take the staying alive theme and like break it down into 5 or 6 different content themes. Right. But it starts from having a very simple brand strategy, simple language.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah. But if you're dealing with brand strategy that's like empowering the confidence of the modern, mature, blah, 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 I don't know. What does that mean? Right. So
Yeah.
if you keep the brand strategy language really simple and then sort of triangulate or yeah, triangulate the strategy with the stuff that's been working and maybe the stuff that's working for competitors, eventually you can get somewhere pretty neat and tidy.
In terms of consistency, like let's say I'm building a content schedule for social for a year in advance. Like, does that stay for forever? Or like, do you like, like how,
Annual content calendar?
yeah, yeah, we
Hot
do it
diggity.
right. No, I'm just
Wow, that's bold.
But like, if at what point is it like the audience might get fatigued from it? Or like, do you just keep kind of distilling it down into like how you can creatively interpret this concept in different ways?
Well, I mean, you'd be familiar with this. A lot of creators, they find that one format that works for them, right? They're
Definitely.
always, taking shots of themselves at this angle, or they're dressed in a particular way and they become a character and they just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And if one video hits, they drop a bunch of videos within that week, right? So I think that's a thing to keep in mind for brands is as you're experimenting, can you find that one format? Because personally, I believe that in the feed, as a creator or as a brand, the content that we share, we have one use case for people. So for me, it's like strategy frameworks,
Hmm.
right? My friend Matt Klein over at Reddit, he calls this audience capture, where the audience captures the creator and they feel like they're being held hostage from this one format or this one topic. But I think from a brand point of view, you want to be experimenting and then try to find it. And then don't be embarrassed about dropping a whole bunch of videos or whatever it is that are like that because most people are not seeing most of your stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And then I think with an annual content calendar, I think it's fine if you're hitting certain events and moments in time, and then you just got to work out how to have a bunch of fluidity and spontaneity. And also another thing that a lot of people are doing is resharing posts that have worked for them.
Hmm.
So I'm pretty sure there are accounts out there that over 3 to 4 years have worked out 30 or 40 videos that tend to do really well for them, and they post them every month because most people who follow you are not seeing your stuff. And so you're trying to post hoping to reach a new audience to get followers, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely noticed that a lot of creators resurfacing old content or even just like that being the advice. Like, don't be afraid to either literally repost the same thing or recreate it. Like,
Yeah. It's
yeah.
it's really counterintuitive. As an example, I created this video in Times Square, just me stumbling through like signs you're a strategist. I misspeak and whatever. I posted it a year and a half ago. I think it reached maybe 20,000 people. And then I started to see people doing this, and it was shot well by someone who's a very good video person. And I was like, I'm just going to repost it. I reposted it about 30 days ago. It's now reached 300,000 people and led to 6,000 followers.
Wow.
I didn't know that was going to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm going to post it again at some point, probably in the next few weeks, just to see if the stuff that I'm seeing out there, the theories are true.
Yeah. So you don't make any changes. You just post identical.
So the two things I might do is post an identical one. I don't know whether to delete the first one or the second one, but I might. But I'll repost it, and then I might just edit it slightly different. Maybe it's 3, 2, 1 instead of 1, 2, 3. 3 signs, counting down. Perhaps I don't know, but it's weird. It's liberating. And
Yeah.
then sometimes if I find an interesting piece of research, just putting the research behind me, green screen, filming 4 or 5 seconds, silent, aesthetic type of thing, no voice, can do really, really well,
Yeah.
you know?
Definitely. Definitely. So similar to the question of how do we know when we've reached like that amazing brand strategy that we've hit it, how do we know like when social media is working to really strengthen the brand identity? Like, because sometimes you get like a rush of sales and then it's over, right? So sales, like just a temporary or like one piece of content goes viral and it comes with a lot of sales, but it's not like long term. And so obviously we want the sales, but we want to be building that brand, the reputation, and instilling it in people's minds. So how do we know when our content and our social strategy is really doing that job of like not only implementing the brand strategy, but like building the brand over time?
Well, as long as the social media content is bringing to life the brand as you've established that it's doing
Right.
that, right? So it's doing that. Then when you start to get into sales metrics, that becomes a different kind of question. Are you building the email database, etc.? Yeah, it's a different sort of question. But as long as you're bringing the brand to life in a way that you've committed to, so with the distinctive brand assets, characters, songs, sounds, slogans, etc., over time that work will pay off based on the research that's out there. And the research that's out there that most gets cited is from Binet and Field over in the UK. And what they found examining a whole bunch of effectiveness case studies is brands that spend about 60% of their energy, their time, their money on brand building and 40% on sales activation tend to do really, really well. Over the past decade, a lot of brands are stuck in this sales activation, like discounts, buy one, get one free, all that kind of stuff. Over time, their brands basically die. So you want about 60% of the brand activity there. So I think if you have faith in that
Mhm.
and you're relatively loyal to your distinctive brand assets and you entertain people, then you're going to set yourself up. And every now and then you'll catch wind and something amazing will happen. But you often never know.
Yeah. No, totally. It's like you never really know, but I think setting ourselves up to know as much as possible is the only thing you can do. So, on that note, I really love your social media template called the 5 A's: um, ambition, audience, assets, appearance, and action. Can you walk us through what, like, the purpose of this
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
each step?
I can tell you where it came from. It came from me looking at my content going, people only want templates and frameworks from me. I guess I should make one. And then I thought, why don't I make one for the social media managers? And I've been in agencies doing internet stuff on and off since the 1990s. So I've seen that. And then I've done brand strategy or account planning, advertising strategy. So I've seen that. And I live in the algorithms. Live in the algorithms. Oh, so hard, so hardcore. It lives in the algorithms. I live in the algorithms. And so I was like, what? Based on all of that, and based on the research into brands, based on some of the challenges that I've seen with social media, and also based on how complicated the platforms are and how a short brief can become a 10-page brief with all the specifications and timings, etc. I was like, if it's a 2-page document, what would be the most useful stuff to have on that document? And so there are 5 A's. The first one is ambition. Dream a little bit. And the way to answer that is twofold. One is, what are some numbers that you want to achieve? And then if you could dream big, part two, what's your goal? It's the big, audacious goal. And then there's audience. I mean, audience is going to be on every single brief. Don't think you need to write a ton about the audience. I would want to know things like what are they interacting with on the internet right now? It doesn't need to be full sentences. It could be, a hashtag, a phrase, a trend, just maybe 3 or 4 lines, not even sentences, but 3 or 4 lines of things that would get me if I was in a creative team thinking. Then we have assets. So this is where we want to bring a little bit of discipline into the creative brief. And I would have a checklist of distinctive brand assets, and the person filling in the brief would check them off. Logo, colors,
Mhm.
fonts, sounds, mnemonic devices, catchphrases, slogans, jingles, etc. Right? What do we have? And the point of that is if you don't have any, you need some. Otherwise, everything's going to be created from scratch. It's going to feel like you're swirling. Every project's going to be really, really difficult. So there has to be discipline with the brand assets. And then you get to go crazy. You need the discipline and the crazy together. Then appearance, just simply which formats are we going to appear in and where? And action, what actions do you want people to take? So that's essentially what the brief's about. And it's trying to solve the issue that a lot of social media briefs are too long, too technical, they lack imagination, but they also lack discipline from a brand point of view. So I think anyone working in social media, if they can use a template like this, it will give them a sense of authority when they're dealing with marketers who've been around for a bit of time.
Yeah. Do you have an example of a brand you've like worked with or gotten feedback from who implemented this template and it worked really well?
I don't, because I just created it.
Okay.
But I'm about to do courses, and I might use it with some of the companies. I mean, maybe we use it with one of your brands.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
definitely.
So
I love it.
I don't.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I'll
I don't
forgive
feel
you.
fraudulent though. I just created it. Oh, leave me alone. Stop picking on me.
I'm picking on you. I'm sorry. Um, so let's say we've created this, we've done all this work. Um, what do you think, like, still on this topic of content, how do we increase engagement and build community? Because, like, yeah, like, like that consistency and building a strong community around the brand that doesn't seem too like disjointed.
Yeah, well, like, so if you look at Duolingo, let's talk about it from a creative and a brand point of view, and then we'll talk about some practical tactics. Duolingo's done this because they've let Duo, the owl, just be unhinged. And people are like, what on earth's this owl going to do and say right now? So that gets people to pay attention. And then because Duo's unhinged, Duo will say things that people will react to. So that's what's going on there. A lot of brands won't do that. Like nobody's going to be responding to that Lionel Messi Lay's ad, being like, "Oh wow, Lay's, really want to interact with you." And that's because Lay's does not have a brand character; they have a brand celebrity. Duo has a brand character.
Mhm.
We develop a little bit of a parasocial relationship with that person or that character, where we're like, "Oh, that character's kind of in my life. I'm going to interact with them." Right. So conceptually, that's what's going on there. When it comes to increasing engagement, there's lots of little tricks right now. But if we talk about Instagram, for example, the main way to grow right now, from everything I'm seeing, is Reels. And I think it takes a good couple of months of 1 to 3 Reels a day.
That many?
Yeah. To teach the algorithm, as they say, but to also maybe find a format that works for you. And because the main surfaces in Instagram, the things that people use the most are stories, DMs, and reels, you want to be creating reels, potentially sharing them to a story. You don't want to be sharing more than 1 or 2 stories a day unless you are that 25-year-old super attractive person. But generally speaking, the reel goes to the story. And then I use ManyChat for DM and comment automation. So I've got a lot of lead magnets, and behind a lot of the lead magnets, but not all of them, is an email newsletter or email registration. And so I might take a reel, post it to the story, and say, DM me a particular word, and I'll send you back a link to an ebook. When I've launched things, that technique can easily get a story to reach, at most for me, 14 to 15,000 people.
Nice.
Uh, if I'm just sharing a post to the story, it'll reach like 1,000 people. So it's a massive difference.
Mm.
Right? So reel into story, or one story in that day, DM automation through ManyChat. That's like a nice cluster of tactics, I think.
Yeah, ManyChat's great. Are you seeing like a more positive response if you're asking people to DM you from a story versus DM you in a comment of a reel?
Yeah, well, I usually do comment in the comment to like
Mhm.
drop the phrase or the keyword or whatever it is in the comment, and then I'll DM them. I haven't really compared, slightly different audiences as well. But what I did notice is that when a couple of reels hit for me recently, it was quite a different audience. Like it was a more general audience, and I haven't really hit TikTok aggressively yet. But when I post there, it's also a super different audience, and they're like immediately unhinged. Like I'll post something cheeky about young people, like research about young people, and someone will be like, "Are you attacking young people?" And he definitely looks like he thinks about the Roman Empire every day. And I'm like, I think about reggaeton every day. What? All day reggaeton. So yeah, it's a different kind of audience that comes through the reels. And it's kind of funny. I got teenagers and I asked one of them recently, "Are you spending more time on TikTok or Instagram?" And they said Instagram, which surprised me.
Mhm.
And I asked why, and they said, "Well, Instagram's more unhinged."
Hmm.
Uh, my experience is the opposite. The TikTok is more unhinged. But yeah,
Yeah.
long answer to the question.
Yeah, well, I think we're just exploring, um, if stories are better, like, conversion makers in a sense. And I think what we're getting a lot of feedback from our own clients, but also from what we're seeing and researching that stories are driving like so much
Yeah.
revenue more than like what's in the feed. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if you're seeing this as well, but you can't do too much with the story. You know, it's an image and a video or a reel with a little bit of text so that people pause and a call to action. As soon as you sort of start putting maybe hashtags or location stickers or other stickers, blah, 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 interaction engagement can drop off really, really quickly.
Hmm.
And then again, I don't know if you're seeing this with your brands because I don't know if there's a person behind them, but I'll share stuff about getting a hair transplant in Turkey or stuff that's really vulnerable. And it's kind of weird because when I do talks in around the world, uh, do talks around,
As you do.
people will kind of quote some of that stuff back at you, and then you're like, oh, I'm becoming a character. And I know that as I get older, I'm shifting into a character for people, which is like if they're strategists, I think the character's like the strategy boss that they don't have,
Hmm.
right? And so there's an interesting dynamic there, which I don't think I manipulate. I don't try to encourage it. I'm just older, and I mansplain all the time, right? Because I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher. Teacher. Um,
The strategy
man
boss.
teach, yeah. I
Is it?
think, but that's so I. This is so awkward sometimes. For a day or two, I called myself strategy daddy, and it was pretty funny for me.
Strategy dad. I
Yeah,
love you should roll with that. That should
I
be,
like
like,
it.
on the landing
I
page,
like
like
it. I think some people thought it was a bit weird. And I met Excel Daddy from TikTok the other day, and I was like, hey, yeah.
That's amazing. Um, what are some trends in social right now that you think are, like, super important for brand strategists and everyone, so as well as social managers to really be paying attention to? Like, obviously, reels are kind of prioritized, but, like, what else is going on that you think
I mean,
is
the biggest one is that you have to fight to appear through the algorithm. Subscribers and followers on most platforms don't matter that much.
Mhm.
So you really have to fight. And that means that you're competing with the best content outside of your category. You could be competing against the best content on the platform that day,
Yep.
right? And so on a personal level, what that's leading to, and there are articles about this, is a lot of people are sharing less and they're liking less in public as well. And the people who are sharing are almost full time creators. And
Mhm.
it's sort of unfortunate because I feel like a lot of people are like, I want to share a photo every now and then of my puppy or whatever it is. But, you know, 5 people see it. And it's not that I need 10,000 people to see it, but like, ah. So I
Mhm.
think a lot of people are a little bit upset. So I think that's the biggest trend to be paying attention to. Two is some of the technology out there, like ManyChat, I think is incredible. CapCut is amazing. I think they're two not necessarily easy to use tools, but if you think about the sophistication in them that's in our hands, it it blows my mind. I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
god, I use like 1% of CapCut's capabilities, and it just blows my mind that that's in a phone.
Yep.
You know, if I had that when I was like 15, I'd be like, oh my god,
I
I'm
know.
in the future. Like, it's super crazy. I think the paid advertising connected to organic is interesting. So I'm about to do talks around the world. And we're going to see if some of the organic content I've made can easily translate into paid advertising and what happens with all of that.
Do you mean when you say that, literally taking, like, an organic post and uploading that as a video, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
specifically?
Yep.
Okay.
So three signs you're a strategist. You know, could that help me sell tickets to an event in
Mhm.
Indonesia? You know, do I need to modify it? I don't know. We'll test that against some of the silent videos. Like sometimes, again, you know, I'll have some kind of prop or something and just do silly eyebrows,
Or at the
or
gym.
yeah. What? I'm proud of my
Love
gym.
those.
I'm
Yeah, they're
older.
great.
I'm proud of my
They're
gym
great.
content. It's not
Yeah.
my best content, you know. Uh, but I think in a weird way, even though it's very frustrating and you have to make a lot of stuff, the onus is on being creative and quick.
Mhm.
Now, if you look at what big YouTubers or even strategists that work with big YouTubers, what they talk about big idea, massive TAM, addressable market, target addressable market, total addressable market. You know, it's a big topic, broad topic. And then obviously there are things that you can do within the content on each platform. You know, get people's attention, get them to watch through, etc. Little techniques there. but I think the onus is on not just the idea, but having to be quite raw, unhinged, and creative. And it's going to be interesting to see which brands can adapt.
Yeah. I think too, I just want to acknowledge what you said about like your followers like don't necessarily matter as much, and like Mosseri from Instagram has actually said that directly, and there was a thread that went viral on Threads where a creator screenshotted their analytics and it said that literally no followers had seen this post. It was like 600,000 non-followers. Obviously the analytics glitched or something, like I would assume, or not. And they tagged Mosseri and he was like, I don't know. Maybe your followers weren't online that day. Like it was
Yeah, yeah.
really, really interesting. But he has said like that followers are no longer the most important. It's like shareability, if they're saving it, if
So
it's sending to the friends, like that's what's more important to feeding the
yeah.
Instagram, the meta algorithm.
Just on that, I want to like Threads is interesting because every time I log in there, there's someone who calls himself an influencer complaining essentially about how not influential they are. Like my feed will be full of, I'm an influencer and I can't get a company to pay me what I want to be paid and my content doesn't reach anyone. And I'm like, well, so you're not an
So you're
influencer,
not,
are you?
yeah.
What? It's pretty funny. But yeah, I think that's something I I was pretty frustrated with the Instagram changes because I could post carousels and at their peak they were getting liked by like 1,500 people, 2,000 people, and that was before I was doing automations. I've gotten over that because I think it's going to push me to be better at what I do, even
Mhm.
if what I do is like 4-second videos of me just going "Ooh," with a graph up or a diagram up, right? And so I'm open to the challenge. But I
Yeah,
think for brands, it's like how do you behave a little bit more like how a lot of us humans are behaving on those channels or creators are behaving? Don't need to have a lot of polish. Um, 4 seconds could be all you need rather than 30 seconds or 15 seconds. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for the brands, how they adapt.
definitely. Because we brought up Threads, how do you feel about X? Especially for brands too. Like, should they be on the platform? Is it worth investing in?
It's a really complicated, tough question. All these platforms changed my life. I've worked with most of them as well as clients. One of my favorite teams was the team at Twitter Next. Did some great work with them and just loved their vibe. So I don't know if I have conflict of interest in answering this kind of question. I think if your audience is there, of course, of course. I think there are certain kinds of products and services that would do really, really well on what X is becoming. Uh, it's more like it's kind of imploded for me.
Mhm.
I had phases where LinkedIn is pretty tough right now too, but I had phases on these platforms where even in my little content niche, I was still reaching 300,000, 500,000 people a month. Twitter's just imploded for me.
Hmm.
So I look at it every day. I don't post very often. LinkedIn's difficult now, and it's interesting because they're trying to encourage creators because a lot of us are a bit upset.
Mhm. Definitely.
So even today, I logged on and in the notifications, it's like, your posts have reached 52% more people. They have never done that until right now. They've jammed the interface with ads every 4 posts, like all the
Mhm.
platforms do, etc. But I think, look, X, the neutral way to respond to any questions like that is our audience there? Is there a risk in us doing stuff? And is what we're doing there or what we could do there working? And if you feel good about your answers to those questions, be where you need to be.
Yeah. You said there are some products and services that might do well with where X is going. Like, what do you mean by that? What kinds?
So I believe that psychologists believe, and let me start that again. So I believe most psychologists are okay with this concept called the big five personality traits: OCEAN, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. The vibe of Twitter is grabbing a whole bunch of people with similar personality traits together. From what I understand, the way that the personality traits are within us also correlate to political persuasion.
Mhm.
So, having said that, I think brands that have anything to do with more conservative or libertarian ideals, Twitter's probably a great place to be, or X is probably a great place to be. More progressive, empathetic minded brands and companies, probably not the best place to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. So, my last question for you. I'm sad that we've come to the end, but um kind of wrapping it all up, like are there tips for like smaller businesses, creators who are growing, startups trying to establish that strong brand presence on social media, but they have like very small budgets, limited resources, like what should be the priorities?
Such a hard question because, you know, one of the complaints that you see on threads about what's happening on Instagram is that you have to become a full-time creator. And if you're running a business or you're a creator but not full-time, how do you do that? And it's not necessarily true. Like you can create stuff in 5 minutes and it can do really, really well.
Yeah.
Maybe you indulge yourself and shoot something for 30 minutes and edit it on CapCut in 15 minutes. Like it doesn't have to take a long time, but it'll take up a lot of mental energy, let alone looking at notifications and responding to people. So it's such a big question, that one. I think there's a useful exercise in wondering who are you if you are more epic and slightly more unhinged. I'd probably start there
Mhm.
because that's a tough journey for a lot of people. We all know people who are just that all the time. Big personalities, say whatever they want, right? Most people aren't used to that, and most people running brands aren't used to that. But I think that's a useful place to start. The second one is see everything as a creative constraint. So if you've got 30 minutes in a week or an hour every day or 7 days, 7 full days, whatever it is, time, what's in the room around you, what's in your pockets, they're creative constraints. How are you going to use them? So you've got 15 minutes, you've got a phone, you've got a pen, you've got glasses, you've got a face. How can you use all of those things to create something? Right? And that's a liberating way to see the world because then you're not thinking about what you don't have. You're thinking with more of an abundant mindset, like I can create anything. Who knows? And if you can sort of get a routine in place where the creation is part of your day, becomes part of your lifestyle, and you acknowledge a sense of, and if you can feel a sense of freedom that you can not get anything wrong, some things will work and some won't, but everything here is a toy to play with, then I think you can go about this kind of stuff in a more fun way, not stress free, but a more fun way. So that's where I would start before getting into anything super tactical. The tactical things would be have a newsletter,
Mhm.
get people into it.
Definitely.
Like you need to own your own data, and try to launch little products that people can buy and just see what works, um, for the creators. That is, and one example of that. You know, I spent a little bit of time thinking about this young YouTuber who's one of my heroes. His name's Vincent Gao. He probably lives pretty close to here. He does a lot of pranks, so he's always in my feed doing pranks. He'll put buckets on people's heads, run away. They'll find him. He's taking off his sweater and he's like, "Oh, what? Huh?" And it's hilarious. It makes me laugh. I will laugh for an hour. I will laugh for an hour. Now he's launched a streetwear brand.
Mm.
What I would have thought and what I've said to him is it would make more sense if he released prank products and then did prank videos using those prank products. Like, so there's a
Definitely.
coherence there. So, for example, he does one with like a squawking chicken. Just "Meow." If he had a product that was him squawking, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
He can sell it. It's still within his world as prank guy. That's what he's known for. And you could build a business around it, like new revenue streams around it. So as people start to expand, I think, because people can get frustrated with their own formats pretty quickly, I think you got to admit that as soon as you get a bit of traction, you're one thing to people. You're
Yeah.
the person who does that. You're the person who does that. And so you want to build a business around that. And then maybe over time you can experiment with different formats.
Yeah. That's
I
awesome.
have information.
You have a lot of
Don't know if any
information.
of it's useful or interesting, but I think about this
Very.
stuff all the time.
Well, thank you so much. This was great. I learned a lot and know that I need to learn more, which is always good. That's always a good realization. So, thank you, Mark.
But I love what you've got going on here. Thank you for having me.